be confident in your ideas, whether they're, right or wrong. Be confident to share them. Use your voice and ask questions.
That's
Just
great.
ask questions, but just don't be afraid to speak up.
All right. Welcome to Breaking Ground, the Women in AEC Leadership podcast. This is the show that lifts the voices, journeys, and insights of women shaping the future of architecture, engineering, and construction, and it's brought to you by Unanet. If you're in the architecture, engineering, or construction space, you know how critical it is to keep your projects on time, your teams aligned, your pipeline growing, and your finances in check. That's where Unanet comes in with project-based ERP solutions, CRM solutions, and an AI growth suite built specifically for AEC firms. I'm your host, Rhianna Dempsey. In each episode, we will connect with professionals across the AEC industry to share real stories and hard earned wisdom. At our core, we believe that a strong, diverse workforce drives innovation and success, and that women are essential to building the future of AEC. This is more than a conversation, it is a community focused on growth and lasting impact. So let's get started. All right. I am so excited to introduce our guest today, Ellen Bensky. Ellen is a transformative leader at Turner Fleischer, guiding the Toronto based firm's growth into a dynamic studio specializing in architecture, interior design, and experiential graphic design. Her unique 35-year journey as a non architect to becoming principal, CEO, and CFO is a testament to her exceptional leadership and vision. Her innovative approach has redefined the traditional business model of the industry, emphasizing that operational teams are the foundation of a successful AEC practice rather than an overhead burden, allowing designers to focus on design. She strengthened the studio's technological capabilities by developing a digital practice team with deep expertise, integrating advanced tools and systems to digitize both the practice and their projects. You are busy, principal, CEO, and CFO. So thank you for being with us today, Ellen. I don't know how you squeezed this in, but we are super excited to talk to you today.
Thanks. I really am excited to be here. I thought when I heard this idea for the first time, it was like, yeah, I have to do this. Anything to help promote women in an industry that has typically and still is to a degree predominantly men. I'm all in.
Well, awesome. And I know that I'm going to interview some people on the podcast that I haven't met in person, but I'm excited because we have had a chance to spend some time together. And I already know a little bit of your story, and I just know that it's going to resonate deeply with our audience. So excited to kind of get into the nitty gritty. But before we like to start with a little icebreaker, have a little fun. And I feel like I might have a guess based on what I see on LinkedIn, but if we or any of our listeners ran into you on the weekend, what would you likely be doing?
If you ran into me on the weekend, I would definitely most likely be outside if I can, and I would be riding my bike or hiking or climbing a mountain or doing anything that involves exercise and the outdoors.
That would have been I was guessing the bike, so I was pretty close. Well, that is awesome. And do you have a favorite spot in Toronto or the area that you tend to frequent?
Yeah, I do. We actually own a summer home. In Canada, they call them cottages, but really it's a summer home north of Toronto, and it's my absolute escape. It's in the forest and it's on a lake, and I canoe, and that's where I just kind of take my busy life and tone it down a bit and just sit in the quiet of nature.
That is amazing. I'm struggling right now to get my kids where we did a digital detox in July, so because it's like I'm on the screen all day. I know that they help us in a lot of ways, but I also value just getting away, getting outside. I think that that is very underrated today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I gave the whole bio. We got to hear but I want to hear the real story now. From my understanding, because I think you know this, but I had my first job in construction, and then mostly I was outside of construction. My dad owns a small construction company, but I didn't realize, especially for the architecture and engineering firms, to come from outside of the industry and kind of make it to the CEO seat is not something that you see very often. So I would just love to hear, how did that all come about and what was your journey like?
Yeah, it was my journey as I reflect back on it it was not intentional. I had worked for 5 years, in a computer company, and I had started as the receptionist and ended up 5 years later running the company.
Wow.
It was a s but that was my passion. I just over the years just kind of took over this, took over that, and it was small enough that I could get my hands on it and really make it, my own. And, what I learned in that experience was, um, if you do it and you have confidence in yourself that you can do it, people will let you do it as long as you can prove that what you're doing makes a difference in a positive way. I worked for a person who owned that company who was not a decent, didn't have values that aligned with my own. And so, with an 8-month-old baby in my hand, I walked out the door after 5 years and, decided that it was not worth it, and I was going to find something else. Little did I know that I don't actually have a degree in business or finance. I have a degree in psychology. And 35 years ago, when I went to recruiting agencies and said, I ran a company and I'm looking for an opportunity that leverages my skills, and here's my skills. And they kind of laughed at me and they said, sorry, but you don't have a degree. And the best you can do is, get a job in a big company in an accounts payable department and work your way up and prove yourself. And there was no way that I was going to do that. I knew that my career journey was not going to include the politics of a large scale organization. I wanted to be able to make a difference. And so back then, all we had was the newspaper. And so I looked through the newspaper every day and I saw a little teeny ad that said Peter Turner Architect looking for a bookkeeper. And
Ah.
I called Peter. There was about at that time, there was maybe 12 people in the company, and I called Peter, and I went in, and I met him on a Saturday morning, and, I knew immediately he was a really good man. He was a really, really decent person who, I didn't know anything about architecture or this industry, but I could tell right away that he was a creative, and he had no idea how to run his company. His mother was doing the books, which typically in a lot of,
Yeah.
founder started businesses, that's the way it is. And, he just kinda put a shingle on the door when he graduated, and it had grown over time, so I guess he was in business 15 years by then, but, um and so he handed me a box of software. So it wasn't Unanet at the time, but it was a software called Win2, and it was still in the cellophane wrap, so the last person who had tried to do this job hadn't even gotten to the point where she unwrapped the box
Oh boy.
because she couldn't cope. But, it's hard to try and set up a business for creatives,
Yeah.
right? Because they really don't know, so I looked at the box and I looked at him and I said, I can do this," because in my mind, coming from computers where it was inventory and ordering and shipping and receiving and defective goods and returns and all of that, I looked at him and I thought, "This is just people. This is just billing time."
Yep.
And it's in an industry that always fascinated me. I'm an avid traveler and I'm always looking at buildings and cities and so I was like, wow, this is like a perfect combination. I can do this. And he hired me Saturday morning and I started on Monday.
Wow. And
Yeah.
I just want to go back and double click on one thing you said, which I think, our audience, I'm sure we're going to get people further along in their career, people starting out and like knowing, like you mentioned, and you kept it, we don't need to know who, but that, the person you were working for, their values didn't align with yours. And I think, I don't know, sometimes we stay too long at places. And to me, that is such a critical, and I have a very similar story, actually, my first job. And I just knew I watched a certain thing happen and I was like, I don't want that. That's not going to be me. and I got out, and I didn't know what I was doing either, and I can't imagine. I was not yet a mother. I am now, but, like, that pressure of, like, and you have the child to think about, but I just applaud that you recognize that, because again, I think, man, if you're in a situation where you just know your values are not jiving, like, get out. Like,
Yeah.
go find somewhere, like, and again, hearing the story, like, you just know, you meet that person, you're like, "This is gonna be a good fit," and clearly 35 years later, your instincts were spot on, so that's huge to just do that so early in your career, and
It
I
was hard. It was really hard.
yeah,
We didn't have any money. We had a mortgage. We had a baby. And it was to me, it was a career defining moment because I just knew that, I tried to push through and I pushed through because the people that worked in the company were so amazing, and I had built a really great culture with them,
yeah,
and so I stayed for them.
yeah,
But the lesson that I learned is if the person, in that case it was one, but if the people at the top are not aligned in values, that it was never gonna work. And so for me, what it taught me was when I, got into a leadership role, it has defined who I am as a leader and what the culture of my studio is,
yeah,
because I would never ever, to me, the foundation of everything is trust,
yeah,
and my studio members have to trust me, they have to trust all of leadership to be making good decisions, on their behalf, because they're investing their lives. They're entrusting us with their lives, and they're building families, and they're buying houses, and they're, my decisions, our decisions, impact that greatly. And so that moment made me realize, like I said, not only was I never work for anybody, and again, that didn't align with my values, but I definitely would never lead any other way.
that's that, and it's great that you learned that. It's like you said, it's not easy, so okay, so you get hired on Saturday, you start work on Monday, then what is the rest of that whole how do you cram 35 years into one podcast? But yeah, just kinda tell us the highlights.
Yeah, I mean, really, for me, um, I was naive. So I didn't know anything about the industry. And I think that was my superpower because I set up the company like I knew how to set up a business.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that that doesn't normally happen in the industry. I
Oh,
was not in the industry. I wasn't yet out there in the industry. I wasn't going to conferences. I didn't know anything. And so I just looked at this business and said, okay, this is how I believe the business should be set up. And so I set it up like that. And um, the the architects, it was tough. It was tough training them. It was tough getting them to sort of, I mean, this sounds silly, but everybody in the industry will know exactly what I mean. It was hard to get them to do timesheets.
yep. 'Cause that's not creative, right? That takes away from a creative
Right. How do I take
process.
my creativity and put it in, half-hour increments? But the bottom line in the service, any service-based industry, law, accounting, anything, it is literally all based on time.
Yep.
And sure, we create value and we design great buildings, and I don't mean to diminish that because I understand that knowledge is, um, what we share, but
Mhm.
really what we sell is time. And so the foundation of our business had to allow us to efficiently and effectively track and monitor and bill our time.
Yeah.
And that's really the basis. And that's what I started back then. And that's, people were submitting timesheets written on paper. I had to read their handwriting. And um my management model is actually not that far off 35 years later than it was back then. For me, and I guess to align sort of with your intention for this podcast, so I'll say two things. One was the naivete about what constraints the industry may put on business, and the other was working in a man's world. And so I went on to have 3 children. And so my eldest was 8 months old when I started, and then I had 2 more. All of the partners who are now my partners, but back then I wasn't a partner, they were all men. In fact, almost everybody that worked there was a man.
Wow.
And I knew that if I wanted to very early on, after I started sort of putting everything in place, I started running their partner meetings and I started putting in the strategy um and I did that for years. And I needed to prove that I could do what they could do.
Yeah.
And so while they had small children at home, they weren't the ones getting them off to school in the morning. So I used to, and this is not the way, thank goodness we work today. But if they got in at 6 in the morning, I got in at 5:30. And
Always feeling like you had to outperform, like, God
yeah,
forbid we just perform at the same level, like, you had to
I
be
had
better
to,
than
and
them.
I never ever talked about my children. I
Mm,
never let my children, like, if somebody was sick, nobody ever knew about it. I had my village of people in place. Um, I actually started my career journey when I had my first son, and I knew what my aspirations were of myself and my career.
yeah.
I hired a nanny in my home when my son was born, and I paid the nanny more than I made.
Yep.
And everybody said, "You're nuts," including my husband. It was like, "What are you doing?" And I just said, like, I knew the world that I was living in, that I had to be able to, leave when I needed to in the morning and come home when I needed to at night, and pick up and drop off at daycare wasn't gonna be something that was gonna allow me to be the best mom and best, you know, employee that I could be based on where I wanted to get. And I gambled on myself that I could make more money so that it
Yeah.
wouldn't be more than I made. But a lot of those years were definitely spent trying to prove myself as a female mother in a man's uh, world.
And in that, I feel like a lot of people, I mean, childcare is such a, I don't know if it's different in Canada than it is in the States, but like we really don't get there, you kind of just figure it out, right?
Yeah.
There's no sort of, options or, some really evolved companies, offer stipends to, people for childcare. But it was crazy. I think I was 7 months pregnant on a plane, traveling somewhere, and I read Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's book, which now it's like I think it was like now 11, my daughter's
Yeah.
almost 11. So 11 years ago,
Yeah.
I was reading that book on a plane and, and no judgment to women who want to step back from their career
Mhm.
and stay home, right? We all have the decisions that we need to make, but I, like you, I've just always felt this desire that and I had a stay-at-home mom who was freaking amazing, who was still my best friend, and so I also had the guilt of like, well, she was there for like, what if I'm not there? And we all have to make those decisions, but in her book, and of course, if I had a researcher, if we were like, a huge podcast, someone could pull it up, but
Yeah, yeah,
he
yeah.
talks through how it's not like so many women go into it thinking, Okay, I make this today. I'd have to pay childcare this. So I'm going to quit my job until my child goes to school." But she actually had data and charts that unpacked the opportunity cost of like, okay, you drop out here and
Yeah,
you try to re-enter the workforce 6, 7 years later, you're going to like cut your
yeah.
income and not just your income, but like your ability to catch up to what you missed during that time. So that's what she just posed the question in the book, like, consider all of those variables.
Yeah.
And I think, man, you were way ahead of the game because again, we people weren't talking about this stuff when you were struggling
It
too.
nobody
And
was, and
no.
I was making it up as I went, and I really wanted to have it all. I wanted to be on the PTA, and I wanted to be volunteering for the school trips, and it was really important to me that we ate dinner as a family together every night, and
Yeah.
so I spent all day Sunday cooking for the week, and I put it in, they were all like, one dish meals that could go in the oven, make a salad, and there's dinner. And I
Yeah.
have meals on top Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the nanny put it in the oven and tossed the salad. And when I came home, we sat down and had dinner as a family. And I always tell young women, now, I also had the luxury of, and I hate to say this because then I sound super old, but we didn't have cell phones.
Oh,
We
yes.
didn't have home computers.
Yes.
So when I left work, I left work. And so that it's not lost on me that that's a huge difference. So because I organized my life the way I did, I could walk in the door and be mom,
Yeah.
right? And have, everything, I would run out at lunchtime to go serve pizza at the school and run back to work. And I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was, to your point about dropping out and dropping back in. I knew that I wasn't gonna drop out and drop back.
Yeah.
And so I just, had to make it work. And then, the other part of my origin story in my company is at a certain point in time, I um asked to be a partner and I was told no.
Wow.
And it wasn't explicit about, back then about being a female, um, but it was definitely explicit about not being an architect.
Ah, okay. Okay.
And, for some reason, and I don't know why, I gave myself an 8-year time frame, which I know people are gonna be like, "Oh my god, that's so long." So I would say, like, the first 4 years, I was just like, "Okay, maybe it was too early, and I'll just keep, proving myself, and growing the company." And then there was a point where I was like, "Okay," and I knocked, and I knocked, and the last time I knocked, before I knocked, I decided, okay, if they this was my last attempt, and I had decided that I wouldn't do this in another company again, but that I could consult because I definitely knew how to set up a firm in the industry. And so that's when I started going out and creating a community for myself of connections in the industry that I knew that I could go and I could make a living consulting. And it actually became kind of a thing that I was looking forward to in a way because I was like, wow, I could make my own hours. I could work
Mhm.
when I wanted and not so it became sort of more of a thing that was a reality. And I think when I went back and knocked the last time, that was something that they saw. It was like, okay, like, she's really this is it, and
Yep.
if we don't do it, she's gonna make that choice, and that was when I became a partner.
Wow, and I think, again, thank you for sharing that element because I don't know, sometimes you I feel like people just think things are just given to people, and they come to you and they say, "Ellen, you're doing such a great job. We'd love to make you a partner." And it's like what you just described.
Yeah,
It's like, I actually got told no a bunch of times,
yeah,
and it's something and I like it's something I struggle with myself is, like, setting those limits
yeah,
of, "Okay, I'm gonna because it's not instantaneous, but, like, what is my time frame that if I can't get to where I wanna be, then I'm gonna choose another path, and I'm gonna have a different plan." And so, again, I think those are all good learnings for people as they're in different phases of their career, but don't expect it to be given to you, and don't give up after one no. Like,
yeah,
were
yeah.
there any things that they told you, like, "Hey, we're saying no, and this is what we" or did you just kind of inherently know, you just had to keep fighting?
No, you know what? And I believe sort of, and I'm not like super like, oh, the universe will tell you things when you're ready for them, but there is an element of that, right? Like
Yeah,
I wasn't ready. And I I loved the company that we were building. I loved everything about it and it was successful. And the people were amazing. And I just and I wasn't ready until I knew what I was gonna do, and I didn't know that at the time,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And there was also the concept of stability, right? My kids were
sure.
growing up, I live in Canada, all 3 of them played hockey, and, we had a busy, expensive life to support,
Oh,
and
hockey is this you basically need a part-time
yeah.
job for that, yeah,
Right? So
it's
so there
expensive.
was there was and I'm sure while I was going through it, well, I know for my husband and myself, there was definitely that factor. If
Yeah,
I left, then what? And what would this look like? So I think it wasn't until that pinch point where my kids were old enough and I was um, wise enough. I knew what I didn't know about the industry. So that's the other piece, right? As I became more involved in the industry, when I was sort of getting like, I was like, okay, is there a world where I could consult, right? And I started learning more about the industry. Well, then my naivete was totally gone. And I
Yeah.
realized that this industry is, or back then for sure, very male dominated and very, business wasn't the focus. It was the seller doer model, and you worked people really hard and you didn't pay them overtime, and that's how you made money. And I was like, whoa, where are the people that are setting these companies up like businesses? I can't find them.
They're not here.
They're not here. And that was when I realized, oh, wow, there was an opportunity for me to do that. Once I did become a partner and then the CEO, and then our company really started to expand, that's kind of where I shifted my perspective from how could I do it and earn a living on it to how can I be an agent of change in the industry?
Mm.
And that's where I started using my voice and speaking at any conference that would accept me, because, I just feel so passionately that architecture, and engineering and the AC industry, they're a business just like any other business.
Yep.
And, um, and I wanted to be part of that change.
Well, mission accomplished because is a perfect segue. Um, in just kind of researching, the various industries, because we again, architecture, engineering, construction, all different but all very interconnected. But the American Institute of Architects, there was an article that they said as of 2022, 2 in 5 new architects are women, which
Mhm.
is kind of like you're starting to see, and it's not just this industry, but you are starting to see that trend in a lot of industries that used to be male dominated. So you would assume that you would start seeing more women in leadership roles, but we know that that is still few and far between. And I'm interested, like, have you seen that changing at all? Because I would imagine when you became CEO, principal, like you're not really seeing a lot of, you're looking around the room, still seeing a bunch of men, and but now we're seeing this influx. I was just anything in that realm of like, how has it changed? How have you seen things
Absolutely.
progressing?
I can give you a perfect example of that. I go to a CEO forum every spring,
Okay.
and it's 60 invited CEOs from the industry. And I think I started going, maybe it was just before the maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago, and
Okay.
the first one that I went to, I walked in the room and I was like, "Whoa." There were 60 people, there were 56 mainly white men, and there were 4 women,
Whoa.
and I was like, "Oh my god."
And this
And
was not 1950. This
no,
was
no,
2019, 2010.
no, and it was like, they were all, it was like a boys club, and they were golfing, and they were like, I was like, "Did I step back into Mad Men? Like,
Yes,
what is
that's
this?"
what I'm picturing in my head. Yes.
Yes, and I'm proud to say that last year, the same conference actually had, I might be, like, almost, I think, 20 women, and
Wow.
the first day of the conference last year, they had the first ever Women's Day on Sunday, just for
Wow.
women CEOs. So,
Okay.
it's a great story, and I'm so excited, and I've met through that community a lot of women CEOs who aren't architects.
Wow. So it really is starting
So it's
to.
it's it's happening. It's happening, albeit slower than it should have, but it's definitely happening. But I think as an industry, um, we still need to be pushing forward for change,
Yeah.
and we need to be ensuring that the model isn't there yet. for the, management, financial management for sure of these types of businesses,
Yeah,
and, continuing to focus on equality for women and men to have the same opportunities. And, but I have hope, and, and what I'm seeing feels better.
that's awesome. And I have a ton of hope too, because I'm getting to interview all of these amazing women leaders. I'm like, they're definitely out there. And that's again part of the podcast is just how
Yeah.
can we tell this is not about, again, I always say it's not about bashing the men. It's about elevating the stories of the women and pointing out like the where there are these kind of biases or, inequalities that we can help to remedy. And so, one thing that I hear from women leaders, especially who grew up in the old boys club time, and I sort of straddle that because 'cause I'm like,
Mhm.
my first job was that, but now I'm looking around going, "It's better." So I'm like, I've seen both sides. But, in terms of, like, the word authenticity, because that to me, um, I feel like I felt like I had to emulate being more like a guy in order to, like, be taken seriously, whereas now I'm like, it's almost like empathy's cool, and I'm like, "Well, I've always had that." Like, empathy's trending, and I'm like, "Well, this is how I've always felt like I should lead," and it sounds like you as well, like, building the trust and the people, like, that's always what has come naturally to me. So, like, why do you think authenticity matters, in leadership and particularly for women?
Oh, I think it's everything, and I think that there's, this perception that if you're confident and you're decisive and you can give and receive direct feedback, you're, um, can be considered harsh or,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
right? Tough,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
right? And I think that, being somebody who's worked, with a lot of men as my partners for a very long time, it's it's the combination, and in order to do it well, you have to have a lot of confidence. You have to have a lot of confidence that the decisions that you're making are, good ones, or at least well thought out ones, because we all make mistakes. So not
oh,
every
yes.
not every decision is good. I've made, many mistakes. There's not enough fingers on my hands for sure, but you have to be confident in what you're doing, and you have to blend all of the things that I just said about decisiveness and directness, and um, you have to match it with the human side. You have to match it with empathy. Everything to me. I just did a post to my company. I do them every so often. We're actually in the relationship business, right? We might be practicing architecture or design, interior design, but we're in the relationship business, client relationships and relationships with each other. And um, if the relationships aren't good and they're not built on a foundation of trust, and whether the word is authenticity, it's empathy, it's any of the other words you can say, it's just that that's the foundation. And from that foundation, you can do anything, whether it's architecture, whether it's building a business, business development, any of those things that we need to do to be successful. It all stems from relationships, and people respond and actually like directness. And
Especially when there's caring behind it. You're
right,
like, "I'm doing this to help
right,
or to make you better,"
right.
right?
Yes, and I think, men, women, people don't like to talk about, I don't wanna stereotype anybody,
Yes.
but, there is something, I think, that female leaders bring to the table that, can blend the 2, and that's really powerful when you can do it.
Yeah. That is so true. Well, I mean, I could keep talking to you for the next 5 hours, but apparently people don't listen to 5-hour podcasts, so we will end just any, one line of advice or a short paragraph of advice that you would give to especially to like women in the industry or just entering the industry? Anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, I have a number of young women who I'm working with to become leaders right now, and really, it's the same thing of be confident in your ideas, whether they're right or wrong. Be confident to share them. Use your voice and ask questions.
That's
Just
great.
ask questions, but just don't be afraid to speak up.
I love it. That is a perfect way to end this episode. I appreciate you taking your valuable time to be with us today, Ellen. And it has truly been an honor to hear your story. And I just want to thank all of our listeners for listening to Breaking Ground Women in AEC Leadership. If today's episode resonates with you, please be sure to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone in your network. And if you have a story to share, please send us an email. Our contact information is in the podcast bio. And until next time, keep breaking new ground.